Greetings. Today I'm going to make a track using Addictive Drums 2, and I'm going to build up a song around it in order to show how it can effectively perform the role of acoustic drums in a writing and final production context. So this video is going to loosely follow on from the last one I uploaded, which was all about using Addictive Drums 2 with an E-kit to record real drums at home and get a lot of different genres out of one small setup. So for this video I thought I'd just kind of take that a little bit further and break down how I made my track called EBDGAD, or EBDGAD, that I released a couple of weeks ago as my alias Luo. But I thought instead of just showing you the final mix session and just kind of talking about plugins and what everything's doing after the fact, I thought it would be a little bit more fun and interesting to reconstruct the song from the beginning. This tune's quite a little bit more chill and is quite a bit simpler than a lot of my other tracks, to be honest. So this one is really just based around a drum groove and an acoustic guitar part. So I'm going to show how I build up some other layers of software instrumentation around that quite simple basis to get a fuller sounding and less kind of bare bones arrangement from this small home studio setup. And essentially my aims with this video are to show Addictive Drums in action being used for the final drums in a released track, how it can be used as a creative songwriting tool and just to kind of be your own band at home, to show a fun and pretty chill way to develop full song arrangements based just off something as simple as a little drum groove and a couple acoustic guitar chords, and basically just having a little bit of fun showcasing my creative process, how to create some cool sounds in software, and how to enhance a simple idea like this to create a fuller sounding released track with just a few production tricks. So pretty much with that said, let's just jump straight into recreating this. So the first thing to talk about is the drums, and these are entirely coming from Addictive Drums 2, which I'm controlling with this old Roland TD3 kit. And this is a kit that I made myself in AD2 that's kind of meant to be, I wanted it to be kind of like soft, pillowy kind of sounding jazz or hip hop kit. Something a little bit like Trinnaman or Alpha Mist kind of vibes to it. So it's quite sort of dry sounding, there's not really any sustain on any of the drums, and the kick has got this nice kind of low end thump to it, but the snare's got a nice crack, so it's also good for kind of fast, choppy stuff. So with this track, I kind of wanted to experiment with writing music to drums, and I was like, I'm just going to record in a bunch of me playing a groove to a metronome for a couple of minutes just to see what I end up with. I wanted to stress that when I was first writing this track, I didn't have a melody or a structure in mind. I just laid this groove in for a couple of minutes. By playing, that just kind of laid down my drum track that I was then going to write music to later on. Essentially, this is a load of random waffle, and attaching chords to it later is going to help us give a structure to it. So, but yeah, that's about 2.5 minutes of me jamming recorded in there, and I'm just going to give that a quick quantization and a little bit of a tightening up just to make sure things are a little bit more solid to the grid. I'm not quantizing things by 100% like robotically to the grid because I want to preserve a little bit of that loosey-goosey feel. Yeah, just doing a quick skim through the whole thing to kind of check for any weird errors or tightening up anything that needs to be tightened. That leaves us with sort of song length drum track here that's now ready to have guitars and other stuff recorded over it. So let's have a go at that. So the reason this track is called EBDGAD is because I actually named it after this guitar tuning that my dad showed me, and I think it's also quite well known as the David Crosby Guinnevere tuning. If you're into kind of weird, spooky, dark sounding guitar chords and kind of dissonant vibes, it's a pretty interesting tuning for that. And yeah, as a guitarist, experimenting with different tunings can sometimes just really help inspire you to come up with new ideas very quickly, and that is essentially what happened to me with this track, so that's why I named it after it. Also, so I don't forget what tuning my guitar needs to be in when I play it for live gigs. So literally after a few minutes of noodling in this tuning, I came across these chord shapes that you just heard me play there, and I was just really drawn to them. It's immediately like, oh, there's some sort of vibe there, but they need some sort of rhythm or some sort of groove to be attached to. You know, when you're playing acoustic guitar in isolation, sometimes it's hard to think of a direction or a way to structure things. So just placing these chords along with some sort of groove can immediately help you to start building that up, basically. So In terms of how I'm recording the guitar, it's pretty straightforward. This guitar's an electroacoustic, so I can record the DI out of it, but I've also got it mic'd up at the same time, so that's giving me 2 tracks to work with in software. So that gives me 2 layers to kind of control my tone, because the DI gives me more of the transient and the mic gives me more of the body of the tone. And I can also pan these around to get a kind of stereo effect without having to double track guitars, which can sometimes sound a little bit unnatural for parts like this, I think. And there's nothing fancy going on in my preamps or my input. I don't have any pedals or any compression or EQ going between my interface and the DI or the mic. It's just dry straight in. So it might sort of sound like I had the guitar part written before and I recorded the drums to it, but it's actually the other way around. I just took the shapes that I'd found on guitar and then tried to find a picking pattern that worked with the drums, and that's how I've given it a structure, and it sort of sounds like a piece of music now, I think, or starting to. Cool, so I've got my drums and guitar foundation in there now, so a good way to quickly and easily fatten that up is to add some bass, and I'm pretty simple when it comes to bass parts, particularly on this track. Basically all I'm doing is following the root notes of my chords. So that's my clean DI tone, and I'm just going straight into my audio interface into Neural DSP's Parallax plugin. I'd say it's typically more suited for kind of metal tones, but it does also work for not that. I've just basically turned the distortions all the way down and brought the high and the mid-range bands down to give me a kind of softer, less distorted bass tone. So I've worked out my root notes of my guitar chords on bass, and I'm basically going to just play them under the chords and then also rhythmically in time with the kick and the snare. And kind of see if I can come up with a part and see where that gets me, basically. So to explain what's going on here, I'm basically trying to work out what my guitar chords are on keys, and I'm literally just playing the notes on guitar and then finding them on the keyboard. And this is because I want to double up my guitar part with piano chords playing the same thing behind them. It's not really meant to be a piano part that stands by itself, it's more of like a thing to thicken the tone of the guitar. And I'm using Addictive Keys for the keys part, which I think Excellent Audio have forgotten they made that plugin. So that's my piano thickener layer in, and now I want to add a kind of top line or a chorus sort of melody. So a sound I quite like is an electric piano or kind of Rhodes style sound with a bit of vibrato on it to give it that kind of spooky thing, and then an ample amount of Valhalla Vintage Verb to make it a little bit more ambient and atmospheric. I'm just playing octaves with my right hand for the most part. Sometimes I use both hands to make it a bit easier. And it took me a while to find the correct notes that don't clash with the kind of chromatic, dissonant sound of these chords, but eventually you kind of get there through fiddling and trial and error, basically. And something to just thicken that up really quickly is I can easily duplicate that keys top line MIDI that I've just recorded in, and I can assign it to another instrument. In this case, I'm going for a Glockenspiel, and I've shifted the MIDI up an octave above where the top line was, so it's also acting as like another doubler layer, which I think adds some depth and atmosphere to the track. And that's just the Glockenspiel that's built into Logic Sampler. Used in this kind of context, I think it actually works quite nicely. So hopping back to my second verse for a second, there's this little production detail I want to put in. People call it a riser, but I'm going to call it a whoosh because, well, that'll become apparent in a second. I'm just grabbing any old random snare sample and I'm going to reverse that bad boy. And then basically I'm going to grab time stretching, or Logic calls it flex mode. And I'm just going to stretch out that snare sample so that its endpoint meets up with the start of my snare hit in this little rhythmic gap here. And I'm going to put a fade out on that snare sample just so I can sort of control the envelope of it. And that will give me this. Yeah, I love these little kind of quick reverse sounds. I love reversed audio, but this is quite a nice subtle way to just, it's a small thing, but it does a lot, you know? Ooh, yeah, that is stank facey. But there's a little thing I want to do just to give that even more weight. So I've gotten really into this kind of church bell thing, this big bong. Called Tubular bells, which is built into Logic's sampler library again, so that with a load of Capital Chambers reverb on it just to make it sound all like you're in an evil cathedral. The evil cathedral. So in my verse part, there's this little picking arpeggiator part that I do on the guitar, and just for a little moment I want to double that up with like a low piano sound to kind of make it sound a bit more menacing as well. So I've actually double tracked that with 2 different software pianos. I'm just going to group those together. I think that adds some nice kind of weight and hefty chonk to that little phrasing there. To make things get a bit bigger in the second chorus, I'm going to double up my top line melody with this synth, which sounds kind of a bit like a Theremin. So I think that adds a really nice thing, and again it's kind of in keeping with my my spooky theme. And this is actually just a preset that's coming from Arturia's 2600 synth emulation, and the patch is called Mermaid, but I've tweaked it a little bit to remove some of the delay. So the next thing is this kind of Siren synth. It's just like another kind of background effects thing, and I'm using Logic's built-in ES2 synth for that. I set the glide between the notes to full, and then if you change the synth to the legato mode, the notes will kind of slide between each other like this. And then just good old Valhalla vintage at 100% wet reverb, which is not advisable in most situations, but in this case it actually works and sort of sets the synth back in the background quite nicely. So that just sort of does a thing to lead into the second chorus, just adds a detail, and I'm actually going to double track that but have the melody go down instead of going up. Kind of crazy thing that does. So I actually want to add some strings to my final chorus just to make things sound a little bit more epic and orchestral, and I'm using Logic's built-in studio strings for this, which to be honest they do sound really shit and fake. But you can kind of get a little bit more out of them. You can control the articulations by pressing these lower keys that you can see what notes that they're assigned to. So it's a little bit fiddly, but you can change the articulation that the strings are playing whilst I'm playing. And the one I'm interested in is this glissando up thing. Which gives me that kind of bend into the note. It's kind of tricky. I'm trying to control which notes have that bend on it and which ones don't, so it's a little bit fiddly. It takes a few goes, but it does help get a kind of more realistic sound out of these fake software strings, I think. And I'm just going to double track that and layer that up a few times manually, playing the part on different octaves and doing it on the violas and cellos as well, just to kind of add a few more layers. And then grouping those together and putting a reverb on it like Ocean Way Studios, that just helps set things in and make them sound a little bit more realistic. So there we go, it's kind of giving me James Bond vibes or something. I don't know why I like it, but I just kind of think it works, I think it adds a thing. Alright, now I'm going to embarrass and expose myself for the purposes of a YouTube video and treat you to some of my shit vocals. So I'm just going to quad track this melody line. I'm basically just copying what the keys top line is doing, but leaving out a couple of notes. And I could tune my vocals with Melodyne or with the flex pitch to tune things within Logic, just to tighten up some of my intonation, but I like to just sometimes slap little AlterBoy on my vocals. I don't always leave that pitch quantizing thing on because I think it sounds a little bit unnatural. Sometimes I'll turn it off and leave the natural vocals in, but something I do like to often do is just to shift the formant of my voice down a little bit, just so it doesn't sound quite so much like me, basically. But there we have it. That is pretty much all of the main elements of this track reconstructed. But I thought that would be good in a way to use for a video like this, just to showcase that it is possible to record music like that and make music like that without having to go into a sort of professional studio or record everything acoustically, despite the fact it's kind of more acoustic music, if that makes sense. Yeah, being able to do it this way without necessarily having to mic a load of stuff up and, you know, have like a whole band of people is like really kind of fun. And yeah, it's kind of a new discovery for me to be able to do this. So I thought it'd be worth kind of making a video to showcase it. And I hope it's been fun to watch. If you've enjoyed watching me gradually putting this track together and you fancy giving the full official released version a spin, you can find that on all good streaming services by searching for Toad EP by Luo or EBDGAD. And if you're also a fellow Addictive Drums 2 user, you can also grab the preset that I was using in this track and in this video from a link in the description. But that's all I'm going to talk about here for today, and I'm going to wrap this one up here for now. So as ever, I hope this has been a fun insight into a creative process, and I hope some of this has been useful for other DIY musicians out there. But yeah, I'll hopefully catch you in the next one, and take it easy.